It's my favorite sentence. Building confidence and credibility in our ability to deliver. And that takes time. Milestone by milestone, you demonstrate your ability, and that builds trust, which is what investors, suppliers, media, and potential clients all need to see before they're going to invest in their own way in your future.
Welcome to a new episode of the eMobility Marketing Podcast. Today's guest has helped shape some of the most exciting brands in the automotive and EV world, from Volvo and Polestar to Volta Trucks and Automobili Pininfarina. He's launched luxury EVs, electrified commercial trucks, and even helped bring in electric hypercar to life. But his biggest message is one that we don't hear enough. If we want the mainstream to embrace EVs, we have to build trust, simplify the message, and in the case of Volta Trucks, start talking about the air that we breathe. So Duncan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Theo. Great to be here.
Yes, great to have you. So Duncan, you've worked with some of the most recognizable automotive and EV brands in the world. How would you describe the common thread in your career?
I think I've been very lucky to develop, build and work with some of the world's most innovative and progressive EV brands. I think if there's a common thread in their development, I'd say it's the process of really deep diving to find the true essence of a brand that's authentic and truthful, but also has a clear differentiator versus the competition. I mean, there's no point in trying to out Volvo in safety or trying to convince audiences you're making a better ultimate driving machine than BMW. You've got to find your own territory that's relevant to your target audiences and really resonates with them like no other.
Right. And what would you say is the biggest misconception people have about building an e-mobility brand?
I think in the early days that it was easy. It's really not.
Yeah.
And I think the failure of many or probably most EV startup brands is a testament to how difficult it is, especially financing these days. There's other misconceptions that internally everybody on the outside world thinks the way that we do, and they don't. I think, and I really see an important part of the role of communicators to take an outside-in devil's advocate perspective and really tell the truth to power, because no one else wakes up, works and sleeps thinking about our brand as we do. And the baseline is that people don't care about us. We've got to find ways of making them care, and that's about building a compelling narrative that addresses their needs, desires and expectations of their daily lives.
Absolutely. So you're also saying, don't take things naturally. Like, people are, like you mentioned, looking different at your brand than obviously you would be from the inside.
Absolutely. And you've also got to capture that moment. That you're working in it 24/7. They might see something of it in a critical moment, and it's about the action that they take at that critical moment.
Yeah, exactly. So, Duncan, let's rewind to the start of your journey, like from the corridors of BMW and Volvo to the fast-paced world of EV startups. These are two very different worlds, and I imagine that the switch wasn't always smooth. So, what was the biggest shock for you when you moved from legacy automakers into the EV startups?
I think there are many shocks. I think the pace you work at, the lack of funds that you've got, which makes you very entrepreneurial and creative in the way that you work and spend because you haven't got a rich sugar daddy sitting behind you.
Yeah.
I think also there's no rule book. You've got to write it as you go. I think importantly as well, the transparency and the visibility of the people within the company. So, in a legacy OEM, you're part of a huge machine, and only those at the very top of that machine are visible to the outside world. Whereas within a startup, there's very few of you, and without a rule book, you're making decisions without all the necessary information you'd normally have. I think speed is one of your advantages versus a legacy OEM, and the decisions that you take are very visible because there's so very few of you. I think some call it fail fast, but that always sounds a bit like a negative. When I was at Volta Trucks, we pioneered this concept of test, learn and iterate. And the principle of that was that you can't sit on the fence and think about things for too long, hoping more data is going to become available or somebody else is going to take the decision for you. It's really better to decide, understand the outcomes of that decision and adjust your course as necessary rather than just sitting there and thinking about it for too long, by which time the market will have passed you by. I think, you simply can't work in the same way in a startup as you do in a legacy OEM or you're sunk.
Yeah,
You've got to be nimble, you've got to be agile, you've got to wear many hats, some of which will be unfamiliar to you. But at the
Yeah.
same time, you've also got to be confident in your decision making. So I think that's one of the most exciting parts of a startup. You're creating your own destiny, you're writing your own rule books. And I guess in a small way, you're writing the future of decarbonisation and making the world a better place for you and the future generations.
Yeah. And so basically, like you're with a new name in the industry, you're going up against established giants. Like how would you say would be best to maintain credibility while you're doing that? I mean, it's a tough process, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, I mean, having worked for, as you mentioned earlier, famous brands like Volvo, BMW beforehand, and then McLaren Automotive, which was kind of a startup because of their sort of F1 mindset that meant they developed products at lightning speed. I mean, Polestar was my first real startup, and I was there when there was 20 of us, and now there's many thousands globally. When I joined, it was still a Volvo tuning brand. It was a world touring car team that I had under my responsibility, but the task was very clear. Go and launch Polestar as the first pure EV brand and the first real competitor to Tesla.
Yeah.
And that takes a very, very different mindset to somebody who's doing what's been done before.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I like the example from Polestar. You helped create a brand that was both luxurious and disruptive. Like, are there any lessons there that you would say apply to any EV brand trying to stand out today?
Yeah, I think it's about, coming back to my earlier point, it's about finding the true essence of the brand and differentiating it from competition. If I look back at Polestar, we really tried to find the essence of that brand, and we sort of really were trying to find something that differentiated it from that competition. And we used 3 words at the launch that, if I think about it, nearly a decade on, seem to have stood the tests of time. Pure, because we were an EV brand. Progressive, because that was the way we were addressing our clients, offering them something very different when it came to the physical touch points of the brand and the way in which we were thinking about a go-to-market strategy that was much more Netflix than sort of legacy dealership type approach. And the third word was performance. All EVs, as we know, are really fast accelerating a straight line because of the properties of electric motors. But batteries are heavy and they're not always conducive to vehicle dynamics. So being with our legacy of being a racing team, we wanted to make sure we were delivering a product that had got strong handling and cornering and steering and everything else. So we use those 3 words as filters to ensure that all of the communication was on message and it really stayed true to the vision. It's very easy to sort of move your course as time goes on, but we wanted to make sure we were really always staying very true to the principles that we first set out to do. Because if we're honest with ourselves, does the world really need another EV startup brand when so many of the attributes and approaches are already covered in the marketplace? So I think, as it was then, as it is today, it's about finding your reason to exist, cutting through with clear messaging and making it work really hard to ensure that it resonates with your target customer.
Yeah. I remember at the time, like everyone was looking at Tesla, like that was the biggest example. And I think Polestar was the first with a competitive model for the Model 3. And like when you saw the first Polestar on the road, you said, oh, wow, like this is it. And let's have a look. And so I guess that's sort of an advantage that you had at the time, right?
Yeah, no, we were very much the first competitor to Tesla. Obviously, many have followed since.
Yeah, absolutely. So like it's one thing to have a great product, but it's another to convince investors and customers and the industry that you can actually deliver, right? So you've said investors don't just buy into the product, they buy into the company's ability to make things happen. How should EV companies demonstrate that ability from day one? Like how do you get that funding going that you need to develop your product?
Wow. I mean, honestly, I don't think you can on day one, especially when so many that have gone before us have failed. I think, the world is far more skeptical than it was 3, 5, 10 years ago when there was huge amounts of PE and VC money going into electrification. I think a well-funded parent company sitting behind you obviously helps, but it's still not a guarantee of success. For me, a really strong plan that is demonstrably different from what's gone before is vital. Especially, now we've got many examples, sadly, of those that haven't worked. Understanding why those didn't work and adjusting your strategy accordingly, I think, is really, really needed.
Yeah.
But then coming back to some previous words, ultimately, we've got to build confidence and credibility in our ability to deliver. It's my favorite sentence, building confidence and credibility in our ability to deliver. And that takes time. Milestone by milestone, you demonstrate your ability, and that builds trust, which is what investors, suppliers, media, and potential clients, as you said, all need to see before they're going to invest in their own way in your future.
Yeah, it's all about trust, right? Especially
Yep.
in the beginning. Do you have a moment that you could share where a disruptive idea actually backfired because it didn't benefit the customer? Did that happen?
Yeah, probably. I think, there will be many of them. I think for me, the one that sticks out in my mind is an example from Volta Trucks. And bear with me for a minute, because this might get a little bit technical unless you're an expert in the commercial vehicle industry. But basically, until we started Volta, if you were buying a truck, you were purchasing a product called a chassis cab, which is exactly what it says. It's the chassis of the vehicle and the cab at the front. And then you went to a second supplier to buy your cargo box, which was the bit on the back that carries all the goods.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were doing some initial customer focus groups and ideation around the concept, and bearing in mind I was the 5th employee at Volta Trucks, there appeared to be an opportunity to combine the chassis cab and the cargo box into one unit. Now, in our view, this had many advantages, including design, cost, weight, and I guess we thought simplification at the time. So as a startup, one of our clear disruptive brand narratives was that we'd listen to the modern customer, and unlike the established industry, we were going to make this a one-stop shop for a better looking, cheaper product. And then our entire industrialization strategy was based on this concept. We bet the bank on going down this route. However, and it's a really important however, we realized over time that while buyers like the concept, in practice, when you actually get into the sort of the real nitty-gritty of buying a truck, no two cargo boxes were ever the same. And every cargo box, even though you see a truck going up and down the highway that looks quite similar, actually no two cargo boxes were ever actually the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we then needed to do was to build an enormous, hugely complex, labor and cost intensive process that would effectively create that customization, or frankly, we didn't have a business. So I guess the main learning from that was, from a brand disruption perspective, the brand disruption really helped us in our communication, but that brand disruption didn't actually translate to a customer benefit, and in itself was one of the serious challenges we faced along the way.
Right. Yeah, and I remember with Volta Trucks, there were so many features built into the truck about safety and all of that. It was really cool. But like you described, if there are other features that are not that practical as you thought about before, then that could be a real challenge, right? To sell it in the end.
And it was very interesting. You asked a customer at the very early focus group stages what they wanted, and they told you, and you then presented it to them, and that wasn't what they actually wanted in the first place.
Right.
And you have to, real learning out of that was the sort of the constant engagement with customers along the journey to make sure that you're still developing a product that was right for them.
Yeah, I can imagine that's hard. Talking about Volta, there's one part of the EV adoption story you feel isn't being told enough, right? And it's not about the climate change targets or CO2 numbers. It's something far more immediate and personal. Why do you think the air pollution message is so underused at eMobility brands?
Yeah, it's a really challenging one. I'm a strong believer in air pollution being a strong message for electrification, but I think it is quite controversial.
Mm-hmm.
And brands don't usually like working in a controversial space because it can be divisive. I think if you think about it, while we can start to see the effects of climate change all around us, we can't see air quality problems. Although, sometimes we can almost literally taste it.
Yeah.
But air quality, and I don't mean to sound sort of, scandalous about this, air quality can kill any one of us if we're a city dweller. And I think that's, now very sadly been evidenced. And I think, why it's not used extensively, possibly because the message is only really relevant in city centre environments where air quality is at its worst. And that obviously, as a result, only affects a certain portion of your audiences. So it does end up being a slightly difficult narrative to target. But I do think that it's underutilized as a message that can really cut through in the right circumstance.
And do you feel like this message, could it speed up the mainstream adoption of EVs? Do you really see that this could make a difference?
I think that consumers are buying EVs for many, many reasons. I think, 3, 5, 10 years ago, they were buying them quite holistically around a number of factors that was including air quality, that was including climate change, that was including sustainability, and cost was a factor. I think cost has now in today's environment become more and more of a factor, and those other reasons have probably become less so. But I think there's still an opportunity there to tell an air quality story in the right environment.
Yeah, I agree. It's like on this topic, like the early adopters, like they're already in, but the real challenge now is to convince everyone else, like the people that aren't naturally inclined to make the switch. And maybe that's where the air pollution message doesn't resonate that much. There might be other reasons for them to decide to switch to an EV.
But climate change is much more talked about on a news agenda. No, every time you see, you switch on the news, you see fires and floods and everything else that everybody is now much more readily attributing to climate change.
Yeah.
They're not talking about air quality so much as being an issue, and so therefore it becomes more difficult for communicators to provide an answer to a question.
Yeah, it's true. So if we talk a bit about the mainstream, like what in your opinion are the top 3 barriers stopping the mainstream from going electric?
I think in no real specific order, a lack of understanding of the benefits of EV. I think perceived cost when it comes to both the vehicle and public charging, and also public charging availability and its ease of use. I think one of the benefits of EV, as we've just said, must be the total cost of ownership. We as communicators have to educate audiences, especially at a time when we're all feeling the pinch, that while the initial outlay on the car might be more, although more and more governments are stepping in with incentives to purchase, over the duration of the ownership, when you take fuel and servicing costs into account, the overall cost of ownership is significantly less. However, I think one significant barrier to adoption is the cost of public charging. If you don't have a driveway or access to workplace charging, and I'll give you for instance, I charged a Polestar 2 the other day in a public charging environment in who shall remain nameless, and it was almost as expensive as it would have been if I'd have been charging a petrol or a diesel car.
Oh, really?
Which immediately makes the total cost of ownership far higher. And if there's one thing that we know about the transition to EV, if there's a concern about that transition, natural human behaviour is just to do nothing and stick with what you know,
Absolutely.
which is petrol or diesel, which obviously then doesn't help with the long-term issues that we all know about. So I think we've got to get these issues lined up. And we've got to be able to ensure that when the proof point happens and we are saying that electrification is a more cost-effective way of moving and transporting your family and whatever, that actually when you come to that proof point, that it's true.
Right. It's also about indeed showing that it's true. It's about also building the trust that it's easy to use, right? People are afraid of a different way of doing things, and you can see that clearly with EVs, that they have to charge and they have to think about where to charge all of a sudden, and there's a price to it, and it's a different way of transportation, I would say, like a different mindset that's needed. And we always also tell brands, like, talk about that, like make it easy, take all the fear away, and then people will make the switch.
I agree with you, and I think if you then extend that into a conversation around, is it EVs, is it hybrids, is it hydrogen, is it whatever, I think we are in a world of buying cars that has got an awful lot more complicated for customers in recent years.
True. Yeah.
I'm going to generalize a little bit for a moment because I don't want to sort of offend anybody, but previously it was a question of petrol or diesel, choose the brand you like, see what's affordable, suits your needs, and you go away. You've bought your car. Now, from an industry perspective, we're talking about mild hybrid, full hybrid, plug-in hybrid, BEV, PHEV, hydrogen fuel cell BEVs, and we're blowing consumers' minds.
Yeah.
They don't understand what we're talking about. So again, natural human behavior is to just do nothing and stick with what you know.
Yeah.
Let's be very straightforward. To most consumers, and again, I am generalizing here, but to most consumers, a car is a practical tool, necessary investment that they have to make. It's not a discretionary toy that they would spend endless time poring over like you do if you're an absolute geek in a certain topic. We've got to talk about the numerous powertrain options and the benefits in consumer language that consumers understand. Did anybody ever sell a diesel car on the range in its fuel tank?
No, exactly.
Does anybody ever drive a car for 300 to 400 miles in one go without needing to stop for a sandwich and a toilet break? I know I can't. But, in the same way as we didn't talk about the intricacies of a combustion engine before, we don't need to talk about the intricacies of an electric motor and batteries now. Customers didn't understand then, and they don't understand it now. It's a bit like me walking into a hi-fi shop as a total Luddite about hi-fi, and the assistant just telling me all the technical specs of a speaker system. I just wouldn't have a clue what they were talking about, and I quickly walk out. And I guess it's a bit of a well-used and a cliche example, but when I walk into an Apple store, they take the time to understand my needs, they talk to me in a language that's suitable for me, either as a beginner or a full-on geek, and I usually walk away having made a purchase of yet another Apple product.
Exactly.
I think we got to understand what's important to our target audiences, and then demonstrate that we've got an offer and an answer that addresses their needs. It's the same old equation that we've always had. It's just all got a lot more complicated.
Yeah. And while at the same time, brands are still talking about kilowatt hours, distance, like range, all of that, while consumers...
It makes no sense to anybody.
No, absolutely.
And I think the sooner we sort of take ourselves out of that and really start talking about customer benefit in the way that we've always had to do as marketeers and commercial people, the better. Because at the moment, we're simply confusing an audience that wants to understand, that wants to be educated,
absolutely,
but not in the way we're doing it.
Yeah. So I guess that's an important message. Like, do your research, really fully understand what the driver needs, like what it is that's important to them, and then build a product that solves their needs, but also in your messaging, make sure you address it and don't talk about things that make things more complicated instead.
Yep. Absolutely.
So Duncan,
and I think also the bit I would add on to the end of that is we are car fans. We enjoy cars, we enjoy EV, we enjoy automotive, and we are naturally therefore immersed in the technology. But the simple thing to do is to assume that everybody else who walks in wanting to buy a product is similarly informed, and very often they're not.
Yeah, absolutely. We should stop thinking inside out, right? And turn things around. And absolutely. If you would advise like an EV startup today, Duncan, like what would be the first marketing action you would take to build that trust that's needed?
Well, I'm very lucky. I'm advising a new startup EV brand now, and it's super exciting. I think we're coming back to what I made before. We're learning the lessons from what's gone before, both from those who've succeeded and those who have failed. And we'll bring an entirely new EV proposition to market with a clearly defined and communicated USP that's different from what's available today. So in a way, I'm in the process of doing everything that we've talked about. I think it's about coming back to the point. It's about defining the essence of the brand and the consumer benefit in that product that will differentiate it from the established competition. And when we're ready, we start talking to investors and suppliers and media and prospective consumers, building that confidence and credibility in our ability to succeed. And step by step, milestone by milestone, we'll build that trust over time so that they're willing to invest in our proposition. I've always believed that trust is earned, so you can't do it quickly. It does take time. Not too much time, because quite understandably within startups, there's an impatience, but quick enough so that your messaging rollout and your cadence has been seen, it's been understood, it's been digested, and it's ready to be acted upon, much in the same way as a traditional purchase funnel.
Yeah. Looking forward to hear more about the startup once you go live. Like, it sounds like a really cool project.
It won't be long. It won't be long. It's very different. But again, having had the experience of, unfortunately, those have succeeded, but unfortunately those who have failed before, we can really start to sort of digest what works, what doesn't work, and come with an entirely different proposition. It's super exciting.
Yeah, and I mean, looking back at your career, so you've worked on everything from hypercars to commercial trucks. Like, you've seen the industry from almost every angle, so I can imagine it's super valuable to work with you when building a new startup in our space. Talking about that, let's look a little bit ahead of what's next. Like, is there like a change in policy that's needed, change in the infrastructure that you think would have the biggest impact on EV adoption? Like what are the things that need to change to get the mass market to start driving EVs from now on?
It's a great question. I mean, if I put everything I've previously said to one side, because let's not go over that ground again, for me, it's policy certainty.
Yeah.
When anybody buys a car, it's the second largest purchase they make after their home. Having certainty that you've waded through all the different technologies available that we talked about earlier. You've decided to make that purchase that is taking you into a different space that you haven't been before. That vehicle is going to be the right one for you for at least the duration of your ownership, I think is vital. I really don't envy politicians in their roles that they have. But if we are going to convince the mainstream to leave the apparent convenience of an ICE vehicle from a combustion engine vehicle, to leave that behind and buy an EV, they've got to know that they're making the right decision now, and it's still going to be the right decision for them over the long term, and nobody's going to change those goals.
Yeah, you need to be able to trust on that. Otherwise, it's a difficult decision. Absolutely.
And we have seen some fluidity, especially at times of financial challenges in governments and needing to make political decisions. But I think, that there is yes, financial considerations is an important one, but so is addressing climate change and decarbonisation. And I think, just giving that certainty and making sure that goalposts aren't going to change for buyers is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking back at your career, Duncan, marketing wise, like what's the project you're most proud of? Is there something that stands out?
Wow, that's another great question. I'm proud of the contribution I think I've made to every company I've worked for. Some projects were bigger than others, some smaller. I think some have gone on to be world-class, successful, publicly listed companies. Yeah. Some, unfortunately, have failed for different reasons. But I think for me, everyone has been a learning exercise, testing and developing your own abilities. And you talked about earlier, launching a passenger EV brand is very different to launching a truck EV brand. It is very different to launching an electric hypercar. Is very different to something very different I did, which was relaunching, one of the UK's most historic Formula One teams, for many examples. But I think within every one of those projects has been great people, great teams, many of whom I've had the privilege to work with on several occasions.
Yeah.
If I had to identify one, it would probably be Polestar.
Okay.
That was my first real startup, and where we kicked off with a blank sheet of paper and designed a new brand from the ground up. That was also the foundations and the experience that I built my own consultancy from, that we've operated, for the last decade or so, really supporting startup EV brands. I've gone on to use all those experiences from Polestar to guide and support others, and it's been an amazing journey, and it continues today and hopefully will do tomorrow too.
Yeah, absolutely. So one final question, Duncan, and I'm really interested to hear what your answer would be. Like, imagine you're at a birthday party and people are critical about EVs. Like, it happens all the time. What would you say? Like, how would you convince them that it's a good idea to make the switch to EVs instead of staying and keep doing what you're doing today?
You're right. You do get this question a lot. I think for me, not in any particular order, I'd focus on whole life cost of ownership.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a rational argument to EV ownership, but I don't think anybody's ever going to buy something just on a purely rational basis. I'd focus on the luxury and performance of an electric driving experience, which delivers huge power in near silence. So there's your emotional argument to EV ownership. And I think I'd probably also, we touched on it a little bit earlier, I tell them not to focus on range as a simplistic differentiator to define whether one EV is better than another. It's basically irrelevant. Focus on what's important to them and their use of the car. I mean, if I give you one example, I saw in the news this week, that Polestar have just driven a standard Polestar 3 for 530 miles between charges for a new Guinness World Record, which is an amazing achievement. But it's not relevant to me if I live in a city and I need a small city car that I have access to charging overnight and only needs 50 miles of range.
Exactly.
So I think converting to EV would also help local air quality that we touched on earlier. So I think whatever the customer needs, there is now a compelling offer in the market for them. EV driving's fun, given the performance, it's cheaper, especially if you've got access to private or workplace charging. So what's not to like?
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Duncan, like, to me, this has been a masterclass in building trust, like crafting an EV brand and tackling the real issues that matter in e-mobility. So thanks for that. Thanks for being here. And before we let you go, like, where can listeners connect with you or follow your work?
On LinkedIn. I'm quite active on LinkedIn under my own name, Duncan Forrester. I have a website, forresterpr.com, RRESTERPR.com. voltatrucks.com. Love to connect with people, love to hear their stories, love to help guide them, educate them if they want the help, because there's still a long way to go.
Right. We'll put your website in the notes, and if you want your LinkedIn profile, Duncan, so
Thank
people
you.
can easily connect. One final question. If someone takes away just one idea from today's conversation, what should it be?
For me, I think it would be that startup is hard. It's really hard, but it's so much more rewarding than working in a mainstream legacy OEM brand that I've also done, because there everybody has got a clearly defined role and they've done it for ages. In a startup, you never have enough time, you never have enough money or resources, but you still need to overcome the same challenges. So, without an in-house expert, you throw yourself into learning what you need to understand to overcome the challenge, and you become that expert.
Right.
And as a result, there are huge learning opportunities in startup life, and those experiences are often very visible.
Right.
So there's no hiding away.
Yeah.
But I think if I really distill it down to one point, it would be that, and I've told my teams this on many occasions, that no matter how difficult it gets, and it will get really difficult along the way, you can't underestimate that sense of pride in seeing a vehicle that you've had a hand in launching, driven down the streets by an owner who's understood all the brand and the messaging that you've toiled over, and they've been convinced enough to spend their own money on it. I don't mind admitting that's a very special and sometimes quite emotional moment, and I just don't think you necessarily get that same level of ownership if you've just been a small cog in a big machine.
Yeah, it's much more rewarding, right? It's
and visible, and there is that sense of personal ownership that often is there in a big brand, but has to be there in a small brand.
All right, Duncan. Well, thanks for that. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you would like to add?
I think I would always encourage anybody, if they have the opportunity, to spend some time in a startup and an EV brand. It's a hugely rewarding, hugely educational experience. And, the world is thriving. This is definitely the way the world is moving. And there are opportunities aplenty to learn, to develop, and to really stretch yourself.
Well, thank you for that, Duncan. I really appreciate your time today, and it was great talking to you. And I think we had a lot of great insights based on the experience you gained in the industry.
Thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Great. So, and for our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode of the eMobility Marketing Podcast, make sure to follow us on your favorite podcast platform, and I'll see you again for a new episode. See you soon.